Last spring, I was going to do a bucket list trip to Greece, and when I booked the trip, I found out we were landing in Frankfurt, Germany, on the way to Greece. Well, Germany was on my list for the year after, so I called my former administrative assistant, Cheryl, who does travel now. She's a travel agent down in Florida. And Cheryl, I said, I'm landing in Frankfurt, Germany. What's the point of me paying airfare to go back there when I'm already there? She says, you want to see what we can do? So she dovetailed the trip. So I did Germany for 2 weeks and Greece for 2 weeks after. And the German trip just was outstanding because of the lessons learned there. Germany, just a quick pickup on it, is the muscle man of Europe. Okay, now I call it that because it's the European Union's most populous country. It has the biggest economy. It's roughly the size of Montana. And its GNP is 1/5 the size of ours, that one nation. It rose from the ashes in World War II largely because we helped it do that, but it's become the 4th largest industrial power in the world. And at the forefront of human progress, high-tech transportation, social efficiency, cultural achievement, it's Germany. And listen to the names that we're thankful for: Gutenberg, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Handel, Pachelbel, Wagner, Mendelssohn, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, Marx, and Engels, just for a few. And the German roots run deep. Now the southern half, it was ruled by Rome, ancient Rome. And after Rome fell, it fragmented into these little feudal kingdoms, and each had its own coinage, its own king, and its own castle. So you had this hodgepodge all the way across the south. Now Martin Luther comes along and rocks Europe with the religious reform, and it results in a continent-wide battleground now between the Protestants and the Catholics. So that's another incident of Germany's dark past, because the Protestants and Catholics fought each other for many, many wars. And even today, the cultural divide in kind of a north-south in Germany, it's a Mason-Dixon line, much like we have. Because northern Germany is the home to the barbarian tribes that were never overtaken by the Romans. It remains largely Protestant. That may tell you something about us. Barbarian, but they tackle life in the northern part very aggressively. The southern Germany then was Roman and therefore largely Catholic, and they are laid back. You have two different types of personalities in the two pieces of Germany. It's a relatively young nation, only born in 1871. I mean, it quickly became a European powerhouse, but that prosperity then ended in a humiliating defeat in World War I. And then that gave Hitler the opportunity to use the people's discontent with the way the war was settled, and resulted in the near total destruction of World War II. A genuine sense of responsibility is there, though. What I've noticed with the people as we talk with them, and we'll run through here in a minute, they have a genuine responsibility for what they caused, World War II and the Holocaust. It pervades German society. You won't find any reference to Hitler, any place to even visit. The swastika is banned. And they, as you'll see in some of the places we stop, they are doing penance continually. We have yet to find that in our culture. But at war's end, that east-west division compounded the north-south division. When the war ended, what did we do? We divided Germany, east-west Germany, and it seems now 30 years later to have learned its lessons from the past. And it's cosmopolitan. They're very outward looking. They're progressive. 2/3 of the nation speaks more than one language, largely English. And they actually know American politics better than we do. And that's the thing I found out, a lesson learned. They're a founding member of the EU. They lead the way in making a healthy country with peace and unity and tolerance. Human rights is a central motivation for everything they do. And one of the world's largest foreign aid donors is Germany. They 11 million immigrants were invited into their society to boost the labor force and the economy. and it's worked. So lessons learned. Lessons learned. Let's see if we can get this to move over. I was on the cruise on the river, and about 30 people got on the cruise with this t-shirt on. Ich heart Issei. I love Issei. Okay? And then I said, well, who is Issei? And one of his great-granddaughters brought Issei over to meet me. Ich bin Issei. I am Issei. Okay? Issei roamed these hillsides when he was a child. He roamed those hillsides and the vineyards and everything. He left in 1938. Issei is Jewish. He and his family got out of the country. They immigrated over to the U.S. Issei is a renowned heart surgeon, retired now in Detroit. And one of his heart patients, Issei always talked about going home. One of his heart patients that was so grateful for what he did for him, paid for the whole family to come to Germany and to be on the old home place there in that little village. So they were all there together celebrating Issei. And we cruised together, sitting side by side, looking at the hillside, and him talking, telling about his experience. So another person that I got to meet years ago, and I'll tell you quickly about him. When I was at Somerset, we went down Hurricane Andrew. We took a bunch of kids down, and two of the kids in my youth group at the time were foreign exchange students. Thomas was from East Germany. Sven was from West Germany. The country had just reunited shortly before that, and they didn't like each other. Sven used to hear Thomas say something. He said, "Sounds like mush. He's not speaking German. He's speaking Russian." So there was this animosity between the two. But they both went on the mission trip together. And Thomas, I'll never forget, because on the last night we gathered in a circle to say, reflect on the week. He stepped into the middle of the circle, and Thomas had been raised in East Germany. He had no religious background whatsoever. None. He never even darkened the door of the church. And he stepped in the middle of the circle, and he looked at everybody in the circle, and he said, "I don't know what you people have. I don't understand it, but I want it." He came back, got active, came back to the country after his experience, married. He's got two wonderful little daughters. He met the seminar group in D.C. not too long ago when we were there. He met us at the train station because he wanted to see me again. He is now the professor in charge of foreign languages at the University of Maryland. Sven, the West German, ended up staying with me because he signed him to a home that he didn't want to be in. And he ended up staying with me then because he wanted to come to youth group every week at church. Sven was Lutheran. Okay? And Sven came over, brilliant young man. The one thing that drove me nuts was he closed all the doors in the house. Germans keep their doors closed. I keep my doors open when I want the air to circulate. He'd be there a little while, and I look around, and all the bedroom doors were closed, the kitchen door, everything was closed. And we didn't real. With Sven, I taught him to drive. I asked him one time, "Anything you didn't get to do in this country you wanted to do?" He said, "Yeah, I wanted to learn to surf, and they put me in Kentucky." I said, "What else?" He said, "Well, I wanted to learn to drive because it's easier to get a license here and transfer it to Germany." I said, "We can do that." He said, "I've only got 2 weeks left." I said, "We can do that." I picked him up at school and let him drive home. We're coming home one day over that narrow bridge that goes over the Cumberland there in Somerset. Barely wide for 2 cars. It's raining. I look up and there are 3 semis coming our way. Sven's hands are on the wheel in a death grip, and this is a new car. And I'm thinking he's going to pin to right this thing before we get to the other side. We go over to the other side, and he's like this, and he looks over at me and goes, "Woo!" I said, "Well, that means the same thing in German as it does in English." Yeah, woo. Well, Sven and I stayed in touch. He went back to Germany, became a Fulbright scholar. He came back to the U.S. for his college, studied at Pratt Institute of Architecture in New York. They have to go back for so long. He went back to New York back to Berlin to practice architecture. Came back then to New York, became a dual citizen, was dating a young lady who was in film work, and they were a couple. And Sven had offices in New York, South America, and Berlin. Brilliant young man. In 2016, Sven called me after the election and said, my girlfriend and I are going back to Germany. I said, what's up? He said, you all have done what we did in 1939. I never thought it would happen. You've elected a fascist. Sven's exact words. And so he moved back. That was good because he was there for his mom and dad. They both died of COVID. But he was back home. So Sven said, you need to come back to Germany and see me. So I did. We met at the Brandenburg Gate. You know, the visit at the Brandenburg Gate is the last of the 14 gates, by the way, of the old city wall. The 4 horses on the top here that you can see right there, the 4 horses on the top are actually driven by the goddess of peace. Now, when Napoleon came in and defeated the Prussians in 1806, he took that whole statue back to the Louvre. Took it back with him. And then when the Prussians defeated him in 1813, they brought it back. Put it back up on top of the gate. And renamed it the goddess of victory instead of the goddess of peace. And that whole area there, the gate straddles the east and the west. It straddles. It was a no man's land during the communist rule because it was in between the two and nobody could go there. Nobody could even walk through the gate. But it was a greeting. When the gate came down, the mayor of West Germany walked through the gate to shake hands with the former mayor of East Berlin. And they shook hands. And so you have that whole reunification happening right there. That's Sven, very European now with his Dodgers baseball cap on, but he's just a fine, outstanding young man. And he was my guide then on this trip. One of the first stops we made was the book burning memorial. This is the university that is where the books were burned when Hitler burned the books. It's 20,000 books were brought out of the university library here, piled in the middle of the square, and burned because they were not of Aryan culture. And you're talking books by Hemingway and T.S. Eliot and on and on and on. And many of the books, as you look at the list of the books that were burned, are the ones we're banning now in our nation. A lesson from Germany. And with that university there, this is, you can't see it, but the panel is, you can look through it on the left, and if you look down into it, it's a bookshelf empty. You look in there and it's like a library shelf, but all the books are gone. But this is the exact spot where the books were burned, and a memorial plaque on that. You move on then, you'll see evidence of the war. Look at the pillars. That building's still standing, but look at the bullet holes. Germany was just totally wrecked. Look at the bullet holes on the side of the building. And this is just as you're walking down the street. Some of the buildings survived. See this big mound off in the distance? That is the rubble that came out of Berlin of the buildings that were destroyed. It is a mountain. They had no other place to put it. They just had to move it out of town. And so that is the whole mountain of the destruction. This is an actual picture. It's in black and white. It doesn't look like it's real. It looks like it's been sketched. But that's what was left of one of the churches in Berlin. And look around it. The total, complete destruction. Dresden was totally gone. It's another shot. This is in Cologne. But again, you see the destruction caused by the war. One man and his hatred produced this kind of destruction. The Cologne Cathedral is one I've always wanted to go to. 538 steps, and this old man got to the top, folks, because I wanted to climb the steps of the Cathedral of Cologne. It's always been one of my favorite architectural pieces. This is the way it looks today. It needs a good bath. It's still kind of black. But you can go up, and this is as you move up into the spire. You're looking up into the spire, going up, and then you find the bells. We're in the bell tower. This bell is bigger than you couldn't get 2 of them in this room. It's huge. And the day that the wall came down, these bells had never been rung in the whole time. The communists would not allow church bells to be rung. The communist government. The day the wall came down, the bells started ringing. all over town. Can you imagine the pigeons in this loft that hadn't heard that bell?
They didn't know what it was.
They go, well, what in the world's going on? There's another picture up in the bell tower as we walked up. It just was gorgeous. This is called the memorial, exact name of it, Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe. That's the German name of it. Not to the Jews, not to the Holocaust, to the murdered Jews of Europe. There are 2,711 of these coffin-shaped pillars spread all across the corner there in Berlin. And this is how deep you go. As you walk into it, you go deeper and deeper into the death. You walk through the panels. Sven got very indignant because somebody was eating their lunch on top of one. He looked at us and said, that makes me so mad. That's to honor people who died, and they're dishonoring them by eating their meal on top. And again, that German sense of how did this happen? Then you go to and you have the wall. There's a piece of the wall still there. They saved part of it, and you as you move through, then this is where it said Berliner Mauer meets with Berlin Wall. And they've marked it with these panels all the way across Berlin to remember where it was. East Berlin and West Berlin are still very different. In East Berlin, you have all the communist, very klutzy, straight-looking buildings, you know. In West Berlin, you've got these modern buildings and everything, and they're still, you can tell the difference when you go from one to the other. Sven, by the way, now lives in East Berlin. So, because they got little apartments and stuff, and he's in one of those with his wife and his new baby. And then you move to the gun tower here. These were all along the wall with weapons. There were two walls there actually. This is where one of them was. See these little panels in front of this? That is a tunnel. People tried to tunnel their way out. They dug through to go that far to get over to West Berlin. And some people were able to escape that way, but through the tunnels that went underneath the walls. Again, this is the height of the one wall that was there. There were actually three to get through, and this is the way it looks, or it looked back then. You're behind one wall, you've got two more in front of you. Isn't it amazing that you have a nation that wants to fence their people in rather than fence somebody else out? But people continued to try to escape. This is an East German guard saying, I've had enough, and he's making a break for the west side. In 1961, and then this statue sits right where the wall was, and it's two, Easterner and a Westerner hugging each other in reunification, and also mourning the death that place represents. Some people tried to swim across, and these are the names and the pictures of those who got shot in the river before they got to the west side. The snipers on the other side would pick them off in the middle of the river. So again, a dark, dark time. This building is the Reichstag, and it's Germany's historic parliament building. It was originally built in the 1800s. It was burned in 1933 by arson. The word has, and the studies have shown, Hitler had it burned and then blamed the communists and the Jews. He actually burned his own government building so he could create a false flag. So they burned the Reichstag down, and there's the fire as it erupted. It had a beautiful glass dome on the top of it back then even, and it was all destroyed. It all fell in. But what you have today then, they rebuilt it, and they've topped it with a glass cupola, enough glass in this cupola, I'll show you in a minute, to cover an entire football field. And to celebrate their reunification, they rebuilt it. So as you go into this thing now, there's four of these that sit on each corner of the Reichstag with the flag flying, the German flag flying, and it's up on the top of the building, just marvelous. There is the new dome. As you look at it, you see all the glass that's in there, but they look down. See the glass? If you look up in that, it's looking down into the Parliament room. They wanted the citizens to be looking over the shoulders of their representatives. They wanted the representatives to have to look up to see the people looking down and watching. So it's a brilliant piece. Sven, it's hard. There's a little restaurant outside of this. It's hard to get in the restaurant. Many of our groups tried to get in. They couldn't. It's a 2 or 3 month wait. When I met Sven, he says, I got a surprise this afternoon. We're having coffee and cake, which is a German thing. We're having coffee and cake at the Reichstag. He had arranged a table. I said, how'd you get that done? He said, I know people. I know people. I said, we're sitting there, and he looked over at me and he said, I wanted to do this to thank you for being my point. I said, your point? He said, my point of reference. I said, I'm not understanding what you're saying. He said, Mom and Dad are dead. We've sold the family home. As I look at my life now, I realize I don't have a point of reference. You are my point of reference. On the spot. On the spot. He said, and I wanted to celebrate with you because you are the anchor to my past and who I am today. You know, just wonderful, wonderful stuff. So this is the way that looks standing back away from it. You see the glass underneath? That's where you're looking down and in. It's a beautiful building. There's some young people gathered underneath the eye. Now, in Frankfurt then, we're going to change directions here because after the Berlin trip, I went over to Frankfurt, and Kristallnacht, you know what that was, the night of the glass. November 9th, 1938, there was a synagogue on this site. The Germans have required that every place there was a synagogue that got burned on Kristallnacht has a plaque. If they haven't been rebuilt, there's a plaque designating them. You walk down the street, and on doorsteps, there will be a little brass plaque telling you what Jewish family lived there before the war. They are constantly in memory and in gratitude, or, you know, and just doing penance for what happened. But as you look through it, then you have this around this where the synagogue was, the Born Synagogue. There is a cemetery. There's these 2 iron gates. Those of you who had Hebrew, you can figure those out. Okay, there. 2 iron gates, and as you move on, there's all that's left of the synagogue. The Nazis even tore the tombstones down. They bulldozed everything. And they saved these tombstones. Some of them were off to the side, but they managed to survive. But this is the cemetery now. Around the cemetery is a wall. And it's called the Wall of Remembrance, the Wall of Names. And see these little things that jut out? They're tiny tombstones. They've got names on every one of them. It's a wall of names, a tiny tombstone for every Frankfurt resident, every Frankfurt Jew that was deported and killed in the concentration camps. Their name is on that wall, and it's got the location and the date of their death on the wall. One of them on the wall is Anne Frank. She started in Frankfurt, moved to the Netherlands to escape the Nazis, and that's where they captured her. But she was from Frankfurt originally. The stones you see on top, the Jewish tradition is if you pray for someone and leave a stone, it's a reminder that you've been there. So you can see the stones on Frank. This is something she wrote in her diary. Terrible things are happening outside. Poor helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. Families are being separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared. I'm just going to let that sit and marinate. And that was it said 1043, it's 1943. My fingers got heavy last night. But then if we move on, I want to show you a couple of pictures. To the left, a teacher being shot in the head. To the right, something we've witnessed. Look at the angle. Look at the stance. Can't make this stuff up. And then there's this. The Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church pre-war. It was a beautiful, beautiful structure. This is the church that Niemöller spoke in. Okay? And this is the church that he began. Now, Niemöller, when he first started out, voted for Hitler. Did you know that? He was a Hitler proponent. And then began to realize the error of his ways, largely because another young man began to convince him that he was wrong. It reminded me of what was it, Emerson and Thoreau, where Thoreau got locked up for something, and Emerson came to see him in jail and said, "What are you doing here?" He says, "Why aren't you here?" And so it's the same kind of thing happening here with the younger influencing the older. This is what Niemöller was preaching to on any given Sunday. Those are SS officers in the whole front of the church. This is where he began to make his first statement, and it's the sermon that got him in trouble. Got him in trouble with the German group. That's probably in my pipe. I thought I'd show it. He'll call one more time because I know who it is. Anyway, this is what he was preaching to when he began to cross the line, and he was arrested shortly after that. But this is what we know him by. No one left to speak for me. Something we've heard over and over and over again. It's in the Holocaust Museum. As you exit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., it's on the wall. And if this doesn't ring a bell with us, folks, we've got to speak up, because there'll be nobody to speak up for us. This is what's left of the Kaiser Wilhelm Church today. It's a bombed out shell. It's a bombed out shell. You can see right through the rose window that was there, right through the middle. They were going to tear it down, and the German people decided to leave it up as a memorial and a reminder of the war. But you can see it burned out. Those are the steps, the actual steps, that Niemöller's picture was made, standing, shaking hands with his congregation as they were coming out the door. And again, the burned out shell, and I decided to stand where he stood and have a picture made. As I was going back to Sven's apartment to meet his wife and his little girl, we were going to a beer garden that night, which is where you go. I looked out the window of his apartment. There's this beautiful brick church next to it, right there in the commons area, right next to the apartment, with the houses all gathered around it. It's like a neighborhood church. I said, "The brick on that's beautiful, Sven." He said, "Yeah, it's pre-war." I said, "Well, it's just a beautiful church." So I walked down, took a shot of the steeple, and then found this. This is Dietrich Bonhoeffer's church. It's right next to Sven's apartment. I went bonkers. I told Sven, this is somebody I admire. I said, "Can we look?" And we went to the building, we looked around, and did the whole thing. But it excited me to the point that I decided I was going to find a book for my brother. He loves Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he reads quite a bit. I said, I'm going to find a Bonhoeffer book in German and take back to him, a souvenir. So I went to this little bookstore, and books for 4 rooms. Just kept winding back through them. This old bookstore. Little lady with platform shoes, and a bun. And I said, "Do you have anything about Bonhoeffer?" She said, "Bonhoeffer, Bonhoeffer, Bonhoeffer." She went back, climbed the ladder, went to the top shelf, got one, came back down, walked over to the other room on the bottom shelf, got another. Pretty soon she had 5 of them, walked out and laid them on the table. And said, "There." How she knew where all those were, I don't know. But as I picked up one that was interesting, it's the first edition of his letters from Jay. What he wrote, the diary he kept before he was killed. My brother didn't get this book. I kept it. I got him another one. But just a beautiful thought as we close out today. Bonhoeffer early on wanted to be a preacher, theologian. And in his own description of himself, he said that he was overly critical, self-righteous, and unloving. The rise of the Nazi then matured him as a Christian, and he saw clearly from the beginning that Nazism, and as he says, any ism is an idol. And friends, that includes Americanism. And the day after Hitler finally stole what the German electorate would not give him, Bonhoeffer's sermon on the radio was cut off all of a sudden. And he fled to the United States for a year, and he studied at Union Theological Seminary, where he learned to appreciate American jazz. But he was compelled to return to Germany to oppose Hitler's attempt to rule even the church there. And in 1933, again, to escape the Nazis, Bonhoeffer went to London to minister to a German congregation there. But once more, he returned to Germany to help against the struggle against Hitler. And he ran an illegal seminary for 2 years before he was closed up by the Gestapo. And again, he fled to the United States, but his conscience forced him to go back to Germany yet again to continue struggle for the faith of his countrymen. And he weaseled his way into German counterintelligence, and with a few of his family, he joined a plot to assassinate Hitler. And for 2 years, he worked for the Allies as a double agent until the bomb that tried to kill Hitler didn't. And the list of conspirators was discovered, and then Bonhoeffer spent 2 years in interrogation camps. The words of the camp doctor, and there again, it's Bonhoeffer's church. The words of the camp doctor said this: I saw Pastor Bonhoeffer kneeling on the floor praying fervently to God. I was almost deeply moved by the way this lovable man prayed, so devout and so certain that God heard his prayer. In the almost 50 years that I've worked as a doctor, I've hardly ever seen a man die so entirely submissive to the will of God. And in prison then, he was a free child of God, just as free he was 3 times to go back to the country he was trying to save. But he understood discipleship. And for 2 years he was in prison at times of war raging all around him. One time his cell got bombed by the Allies. And so the cold air was allowed in and the Germans couldn't fix it. So he was literally living halfway to the elements. Miserable cold winter. And one of the other prisoners that was with him there, this is an English officer, who wrote these words: Bonhoeffer always seemed to me to spread the atmosphere of happiness and joy over the least incident and profound gratitude for the mere fact that he was alive. He was one of the very few persons I've ever met for whom God was real and always near. And on Sunday, April 8th, 1945, Pastor Bonhoeffer conducted a service of worship, spoke to us in a way that went to the heart of all of us. He found just the right words to express the spirit of our imprisonment and the thoughts and resolutions that had brought us. He'd hardly ended his last prayer when the door opened and 2 civilians entered, and they said, "Prisoner Bonhoeffer, come with us." And that had only one meaning for all the prisoners: the gallows. We said goodbye to him. He took me aside and whispered in my ear, "This is the end, but for me, it's the beginning of life." And the next day he was hanged in Flossenburg. Cost of discipleship. The beginning of life. Saying yes to God requires your no to all injustice, to all evil, to all lies, to all oppression, and violation of the weak and poor. So is this a Bonhoeffer moment we're in? Is this a Bonhoeffer moment for all of us? Because Victoria Barnett in the Christian Century wrote, Dietrich Bonhoeffer didn't choose to be a martyr. He simply tried, as many others did, to be decent in the face of evil. And he did just that. You know, one last stop that we made in Germany in the forest. Well, let me do this first. Victoria Barnett says this, and I think this is what we probably need to hear. The century stretching before us will be one of tremendous turmoil driven by intensifying climate change, battles over resources, economic disparity, and the refugees fleeing these things. In the U.S., we will struggle with our nation's own original sins, the deeply intertwined history of racism and violence. The sheer ugliness of our times has permeated not just our social fabric, but our individual relationships. And it's increasingly difficult to trust what we are told. In such moments, we shouldn't read Bonhoeffer for superficial sound bites or empty reassurances of larger-than-life heroism. We should read him because his is the story of one decent human being who understood better than any of us that in evil times we must remain faithful, if only for the sake of future generations, because we are creating for them the foundation from which they can do good in this fallen world. One last stop we made on my German trip was to the Black Forest, which was much needed after all the dark history of Germany we walked through. And we stayed in the Black Forest at a little inn that dates all the way back to Goethe. Goethe was the German Shakespeare. And the inn there, while it's got a modern facility next to it, the original inn still stands where Goethe spent 4 days. There are 3 bedrooms in that building that they rent out. And out of 40 people, for some mysterious reason, I got the Goethe bedroom. I slept in the bedroom that has changed quite a bit since then, probably. But the Goethe house. And there's a picture of it. And this is what we learn in closing. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy. The moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. Whatever you think you can do, or believe you can do, begin it. Action has magic and power and grace. Let us then be up and do it. Questions or anything that you might have?
I shared this with this table, but I'll share it with a larger group. There's a movie in the theaters now called Nuremberg. Highly recommend it. It deals with the trials of war criminals after World War II. And in the movie, and I assume in the actual history, there was a psychiatrist, an American psychiatrist, who was assigned to interrogate, evaluate, listen to the German generals and officers, trying to understand how they could possibly be involved in killing 12 million people. And toward the end of the movie, the camera pans over to this psychiatrist, this American psychiatrist, and he's talking. And he says, you know, throughout my whole professional career, I've tried to define evil. He said, until now, I have not ever been able to define evil. But now I know what evil is. Evil is the absence of empathy. And I think about that in reference to something Elon Musk said last year. The problem with America is we have too much empathy.
And cruelty for the sake of cruelty is being fostered. That's the only reason for it. To be cruel.
Too much empathy.
There's a movie that the Angel group does, and sometimes they get a little stilted, but it was a movie called Bonhoeffer, and it's excellent as well. It shows when he stumbles on his way to the gallows, the guard that tried to get him to escape the night before to save his life, and he wouldn't do it unless the Jewish friends could come with him. As he stumbles on the way to the gallows, he grabs this book, the notes, and shoves it in the guard's hands and says, "Get this to my mother." That's the way the book got it. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, Jerry.
You know, we're probably in this group, I'd say, all of one accord. We are not so in our churches necessarily.
That's right.
Any thoughts about how we can mobilize? Can we mobilize without alienating, or is that just what has to happen because of people who are embracing?
Sometimes, Jerry, I think we need to just write the folks off who drank the Kool-Aid. and I hate to do that ever. I posted a thing on Facebook. A friend had posted it, and it was, our president was in the water, and he was flailing the water, and it said, "What would you throw him?" And I wrote, "An anchor." And another friend wrote, "Make it gold and he'll grab it right away." And so it was an attempt at some humor that one of our members wrote me, "That wasn't very Christian." And I thought, do I let it go? Not this time. I wrote back, I said, "Well, this man tries my Christianity every day with every word and every act of it. And I'm sorry you feel that way, but I love you." I don't know what else we can do. I've been at the demonstrations, I've gone out. If I was in Minnesota, I think I'd be in the middle of it right now. God bless Minnesota. Gee, those people. Those people have shown us what has to happen. Because we're teetering. We truly are.
We've gone over the edge.
Yeah. And Sven, I was able to talk to Sven, and he says the bulk of the German people are just amazed, because we've always looked to you all to be our guiding star. And we no longer can look for that. The German army, by the way, now they're increasing. They're going to draft, because they are concerned about the Russians. So they're going to draft for the first time, and German troops, for the first time since World War II, are in Lithuania, by invitation of the Lithuanians, because they don't have enough army to withstand the Russians if they come across. So the Germans are there to defend the Lithuanian. Isn't it strange the way things just do? Yeah, Sven is just, I talked to a Norwegian couple at one of the restaurants. They're sitting there on a little cafe, on the street. They found out I was American, and you really go very carefully with that over there now, because some folks think that we're all like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But for the most part, they couldn't understand it either. We Norwegians have always been the one we modeled to be like, and now we don't know what to make of it. And did you know that originally, they figured out percentages, only 3% of the German population were avowed Nazis. 7% joined the resistance. 90% didn't do anything. Just rode with.
They all suffered the consequences.
Yes, and total destruction on that country. This day, you can't go in here without seeing the evidence of a war that just totally decimated the country because of the hatred of one man. So those are lessons learned in Germany. I'll see what I learned in Egypt in May. So I've got to get all these backup troops in because the body's starting to break down. Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you.